Welcome to the Dark Ozarks, the dark side of the Queen City. Surely not.
Springfield, Missouri has its spooky side for sure.
Yes, and we will get back to that in a minute.
Thank you for supporting history, keeping our legends alive, and tonight you're supporting the Fox Theater and the History Museum on the Square in Springfield, Missouri.
We encourage you to check out Always Buying Books in Joplin, Missouri, in person and online on Facebook and at the website, alwaysbuyingbooks.com, for all your reading needs, including a large selection on the paranormal, history, and more. Not to mention, the building is haunted. Tell Bob and Elise we sent you.
We also want to thank Beard Engine Brewing Company in Alba, Missouri. Beard Engine Brewing is the only English-style brewery in Missouri and has been twice named Missouri's best brewery by the Missouri Brewers Association. Great beer and great food in a historical building with a noir past. And yes, their building is also haunted. Tell Nate and Tiff that we sent you.
Now that we got formalities out of the way, we can actually get the show on the road.
Yes. So we are talking about the spookier side of Springfield tonight.
Right. And since we have a lovely group of people right here, what's some of the spooky stuff you've heard about? You might have already just talked about this, but I wasn't here, so it didn't happen. So, when you think spooky in Springfield, what comes to mind? Well,
That's fair.
yeah. What about you?
We're getting to
Yeah,
that
we
one.
will get to that one. So, just hold on, and we're gonna let you down. So, I think as far as urban legends go, in Springfield, I think the biggest one that comes to mind for me are the tales of vampires underneath the city.
Downtown.
Yeah, downtown. Oh, always. So, vampires,
Vampires.
garlic.
Garlic. Well, apparently garlic is not the real issue in Springfield. And first of all, where do you find vampires in Springfield? In the tunnels downtown. And what are the tunnels? Some people may not know. Basically, it's Jordan Creek. A lot of people would be surprised to know that there is a creek, a fairly sizable one,
Pretty large.
that flows through downtown Springfield. And the reason they'd be surprised is that since the 1930s, it has been covered, boxed in with concrete culverts. And they did so to help control flooding. Now, ironically, there's a plan in action that they are in the process of uncovering Jordan Creek, but still, supposedly, we won't have flooding problems.
Allegedly.
Talk to the city about that one.
Yeah.
Anyway, so over time, with the tunnels being underground and enclosed, people started talking. Basically, what happens down there? Is there something creepy down there? And over time, it became vampires. And that seems kind of random in Springfield, Missouri.
Well, um, if you were ever a bored college student on a
I
Friday
was.
night,
I was.
not saying that I was, what you would do, allegedly, is you'd go downtown and you'd find you an entrance to the tunnels. Now, I may or may not be speaking from experience for my legal team. But some people, you go to spook houses, right? And you want the thrill, you want the jump scares, you want, your adrenaline pumping. That's why we do it. If that's not why you do it, I'm kind of concerned. But, who am I to judge? But you get down in there and, just talking like this, it'll just echo and echo and echo and echo. I mean, you obviously have to bring a flashlight. There's no sources of light, and the tunnels seem to go on forever. I mean, they cover oh, my bad, a very large, run under downtown.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly the extent, the mileage, but there are a number of them, and it's easy to get turned around and lost in them.
There's all kinds of, offshoots and stuff. I only ever made it so far because,
Tell your story.
okay, so again, you know, you're looking for the thrill of it. You go down in the tunnels, and I'll start with my story, and then I'll relay a couple things that I've been told by acquaintances and friends. I'd say you get down there, you go about 200 yards down this particular tunnel, which I will not tell you where it's at. Um, and I I found a chair, right? It's like a school chair. You'd have it like in the lunchroom, which in and of itself isn't necessarily too bizarre because unfortunately people will throw junk down into the culverts all the time. When we do have flooding, it gets washed through. But, it was a chair poised if you sat in it, you could look just perfectly down the entrance of the tunnel and see anyone that's coming. And there was like a bunch of like, you know, Mountain Dew, Coca-Cola, just a bunch of like different soft drinks just sitting around it. And I was with a couple friends, and we noticed that up above the chair was like a little tiny ledge. And if you climbed up there, and this is one of the big, reasons why people say there's vampires, it's like a little manhole with the metal cover on it. And if you look down in there, I didn't see anything because it's pitch black. But one of my friends swore up and down that they saw church pews, which is actually kind of a recurring theme among stories told about this particular location. This didn't happen to us, but if you go down there at the wrong time, um, you can sometimes hear people. I've heard chanting or singing, just conversations. Now, it's not uncommon to run into other urban explorers, for lack of a better term. But I can't think of too many people that will just walk through a tunnel and almost like monastically chant. I think that my personal experience was a little underwhelming, but I kind of wanted to relay that because if you couple just like the weird things, right? Church pews and a underground room that's underground, um, a lookout spot, you know, I think people would leave like satanic Bibles and stuff down there just to, scare the hell out of people. Adds to the legend. But you take all these things into consideration, and it's really easy for your brain to start kind of running away with stuff. Um, and that's kind of that fear instinct is very much deeply ingrained in us. It's a survival mechanism. When the hair stands up on the back of your neck, you got fight or flight. And that's there for a reason. Except we unfortunately sometimes just trigger that for no reason because we want to. Do you have any stories of the vampires or the tunnels?
Well, yeah, I actually was gonna kind of talk about the things that kind of led to that before the time that you were in there. Um, because there are tales that, according to some people, go back a long ways. Actually, there are some stories, and I've heard them, and I've read them in a book, but I've not been able to verify them, that go back to the 1890s of basically a sort of a vampire cult of several very successful professional men and businessmen, basically having some sort of club and supposedly engaging in blood drinking, things like that. as a means of gaining success and luck. And the story went, it's a cautionary tale. The story went that each of these gentlemen ended up dying in a very ironic way. You know, a doctor dying in a very strange accident, and they couldn't get a doctor there. And of course, he can't help himself. So he dies that way. Just a cautionary tale. So I don't know how much truth is there to it. Now, what really kind of bolstered the vampire cult stories actually goes back to a real situation in the 1990s, and that was the Feeney family murder trial. And it was a tragic situation. Cheryl Feeney and her children were at home, and her husband, John, he was a school teacher, and he was at a conference at the Lake of the Ozarks that weekend. And she and her children are murdered. Very, very gruesomely. And ultimately, they charged the husband with murder of his family on with the theory being that he was able to leave the conference, come back, kill them, and get back up there by the next morning to have an alibi. And what does this have to do with vampires? Well, during the course of the trial, testimony comes out that he participated in various role-playing games, including Magic the Gathering and a vampire-related game. And there was some question of how far did this vampire group go, as far as did they drink blood, et cetera, et cetera. And it was quite scandalous for the mid-90s, people not thinking about this. And that fueled the theory that these people were meeting, and there was gossip and rumors that where they actually met was down in these tunnels, the Jordan Creek tunnels. And so that fueled that. Now, could there be other things going on down there, unrelated to whether they're vampires or not? People meeting, when they don't want people to know what they're doing, of course. But that's how that got started. It is kind of ironic that there is a story that goes back over 100 years about vampires. Now, the flip side of that is a lot of people don't realize or remember that during the late 70s and during the 80s and early 90s, there sort of was a rash of vampire-related crimes and cults in various large cities, New York and New Orleans primarily. And it started getting attention when a reporter who was investigating this lifestyle ended up being murdered in New York City. And so you get these stories from other places, these big places, and then you get this sensational trial and testimony that it was involved in these games, and it just really fueled the fire. Ultimately, he was acquitted of the murder, and no one has ever been charged again. The murders are unsolved at this point. But that's sort of the background to that. Now, I've heard stories of people being chased in the tunnels.
Yeah.
That they come across a group or come closer. They're hearing chanting, like you said, chanting or singing, something that sounds like something ritualistic or something. And then someone comes at them, chasing them off and chasing them away. I've heard that a number of times. Then the other situation that comes out of, not necessarily directly out of this, but I think it was 2016, there was a woman in Springfield who, she and her boyfriend were in a vampire lifestyle group and drinking each other's blood, and she ultimately killed him. And it got a lot of press.
See, if we're not careful, we're going to turn into a true crime podcast.
Well, I understand that. Well, and we may on some, but those are the contexts of it.
And it always gets boiled down to, a spooky story. Did you hear about this? So and so saw this. And I mean, if you want my personal opinion, which you probably don't, but you're going to get it anyway, so much of this boils down to just pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
The big explosion of like vampire lifestyle cults and stuff like that. I blame Anne Rice for that, which isn't a bad thing, but it so many different factors come into play. And did Feeney actually murder his family? No idea. Do I think that playing Vampire the Masquerade had a contributing factor in that? No, I don't. It's the same argument that you get with, video games cause violence.
Well,
Because before video games, it was movies, and then it was
Right.
comics, and then it was
Cartoons.
breathing or something. But
it was the same kind of attitude. Of course, the role-playing games were just really emerging at that time and becoming very popular. And so people were afraid of them. There were people who were, oh my gosh, this is horrible. 20 years earlier, it was Dungeons and Dragons. Oh my gosh, this is horrible. This is, horrible things are going on. And, and now most people don't think twice about it.
right.
So now you mentioned we were talking about downtown, and you mentioned the thrill of spook houses and so forth earlier.
Yeah,
Uh,
I like a good spook.
Now, ironically, there is a spook house downtown Springfield that is actually haunted, and that's the Hotel of Terror.
Mm-hmm.
The Hotel of Terror, if you haven't gone to it, experience it, because it's unique in several respects. One, it's very well done. Two, it is one of the oldest continuously operating spook houses in the United States. It has been in business and run by the same people since 1978. I think there's only two in the country that are in existence longer. But what makes the Hotel of Terror kind of interesting from our perspective is that the building has a very noir past.
Mm-hmm.
A number of people died there through suicides, possible murder. One man was seen in the lobby and disappeared and never found again. One of the tragic stories there was back in the 1920s, a couple ended up reuniting. It was a married couple. They had been separated for about a year, and the husband had fallen on hard times. The wife had too. And the husband had the children, two small children, had brought them to the orphanage, the children's home in Springfield, the orphanage, because neither one of them could care for, could support the children. And so had left them there until hopefully got back on their feet. And in the course of all this, strain of the marriage, they had separated. The orphanage burned down and the children were killed. And the couple ended up running into each other at the Hotel of Terror. And there are descriptions of, people witnessing this, how traumatic it was to see these two parents grieving. And ironically, the building is haunted, and it is haunted by a small girl. Whether it's related to that incident or not, we don't know. But a number of people who work there and have worked there over the years have seen her, and typically in the same place. So if you go through it, keep an eye out. You might see a ghost, a real one.
On the topic of ghosts,
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about Drury.
Okay. Drury's pretty interesting. Drury is a fairly old university for this part of the country, established, if I recall right, 1970s, and was built, the buildings were built on property that had been part of fortifications during the Civil War. And actually, you can see some of the fortifications still on campus. And also, there is a large mass grave of soldiers there.
Do we know where that's at?
If I look at a map, I can find it, but
Do they have it marked?
it is not marked. It is not marked. And there is actually, there is a second mass grave of soldiers that is closer to the square as well. So, that total, it's estimated about 800 soldiers are in those two mass graves. So there's a lot right there. And I've heard accounts of people seeing what appears to be Civil War reenactors and then find out there aren't any on campus. And then another pretty prominent ghost story on Drury is related to the Clara Thompson Hall. And Clara Thompson is actually the person who is suspected of haunting it. She had previously been Claire Wilson, had recently married Mr. Thompson, come down with, at the time, what they call consumption, which is tuberculosis, and passed away. And she is at times seen in the building, but usually heard playing music, playing piano. And people often say they'll hear piano music, and then they hear, the flourish, the music ends, and they hear like the piano bench push back, like someone has pushed it back to get up and walk off. So that happens a lot. And those are the stories at Drury that I'm familiar with.
That's about the extent of my knowledge. I mean, I don't know about Clara Thompson, but I always find tales and specters of the Civil War really, really fascinating. Now, we're from Joplin, so our battle probably wasn't quite as big as y'all's was. But
actually, the Battle of Carthage was about the same number of men.
really,
Mm-hmm.
well, we
Or
didn't
at
get as
least
much
they were.
notoriety,
No.
which is okay.
Well, if you're talking about Wilson's Creek, no, there were some more then, but there were two battles in Springfield.
Right. But we're no strangers
Mm-hmm.
to that.
Mm-mm.
Have you guys seen anything like that ever before? No, not even particularly Civil War, related specters. You got a ghost encounter? No?
Oh, wow.
You guys aren't hanging out in the right places then.
Not in the fun places. And actually, that reminds me, one of my favorite Civil War ghost stories in Springfield is in one of those places that you would not expect, where, they talk about cryptids being an animal out of place. This is almost a Civil War ghost out of place. And that's at University Plaza. Pretty much the last place you would expect a Civil War ghost. But even shortly after it was built and opened, people would see, and employees would see, a shadow man that appeared to be in a Civil War period uniform, an officer's coat, walking through the lobby and walking through the hallways. And they've dubbed him the Colonel, and have for years. And people have wondered who he was or why he was there. There's different theories. Some people have theorized that it's Colonel Phillips, or Phelps rather. And I've heard some people say, well, the University Plaza is built on part of what was his farm. And if it was at the extreme north end. I don't think it quite came this far north, but a lot of people associate the Colonel Shadow Man with Colonel Phelps. Whether he is or not, I don't know. You know, part of me kind of wants to think maybe it's General Nathaniel Lyons, but people tend to see him at Wilson's Creek, but who knows?
It's probably some unnamed soldier.
Probably is. Probably is, but he wanders University Plaza now. And so it's kind of a ghost out of place.
Right. Well, I mean, to an extent, almost all ghosts are kind of out of place, or rather out of time, would be the better way to phrase that. And I mean, talking about something that's kind of out of time, you guys know about the castle here?
15 Castle.
What do you know about it? Yeah? Yeah, I can imagine. That's cool. Awesome. So,
Pythian Castle.
who knows what it was originally?
Well,
Got me. Well,
well, that's a little later on. It was built by the Knights of Pythias, which is a fraternal order, kind of like the Shriners or the Elks or the Masons. And it was an orphanage and retirement home, so that members in their old age would have a place to live, and orphans of members and widows actually too, could live there and be supported by the order. And so it was used for that for a number of years. And then during World War II, it was a prisoner of war camp. And actually, there were Japanese and German. There was one Japanese soldier there and then German soldiers. And one of the soldiers, he was very depressed, and they allowed him to paint. And there are paintings in the building that he painted of his homeland. And very, very evocative, very pretty. And so activity was encountered over time there. It's hard to know exactly. And I kind of have a personal story. I almost bought it.
you should have.
I should have. Instead of
Wow.
Tamara, I'd have Tamara's position now. In the early 90s, it was owned by the city, and it went up for silent auction. And my husband and I decided, we talked about putting in a bid. And like I said, it was a silent auction, so you just put in a bid. And we had $5,000 that we could have put towards it. And then we chickened out, thinking, oh, it's going to go for a lot more than that, etc. And it's a huge building, has a lot to be done, etc. So we did not make the bid. Ends up, one fellow bid on it, and he bid $4,000. We would have won. So he then renovated a few rooms and lived in it for a few years, then sold it at a substantial profit to the current owner, who has done an amazing job at renovation. And all my hat is off to her, all Caduce. They've done a wonderful job with it, and uh, it's open for various activities, and you can book book it for weddings or whatever, and they have ghost tours, etc. So I think that's amazing. And
And I would recommend taking a ghost tour there.
I would too.
I mean,
And
it's an unwritten rule that every castle is haunted.
yes,
Um, exactly.
that's right. Now should I tell the story of when it was on TV?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So a number of years ago, there was a TV show called The Haunted Collector. John Zaffis was the host, and the the premise of the show was they would go to locations that hauntings seemed to be centered around items. And the idea of figuring out what item was haunted or had an attachment, removing it, and then activity going away. I'll tell a little story here. They had contacted me a number of times for wanting to film at one of the locations that we managed for paranormal events. And I declined multiple times. No, we like our ghosts. We'll keep them. But ultimately I ended up appearing on one of the episodes as a consultant. And they filmed that episode down in the Joplin area, and then they left there and came up here and filmed at the Pythian Castle. And they ascertained that there was an attachment around a sword, and it was removed and presumably still resides in the John Zaffis Museum in Connecticut. And it was reported on the TV show that then the owner said the activity went away. My understanding is that bookings for the ghost tours, etc., went way down for a while, and they had to build up business again. But from everything I've heard, no fear, the ghosts are still there.
Well, I mean, you're talking about a building that was built, I mean,
Around the turn of the century.
right.
I don't remember the exact
It was an
year.
orphanage. And, you know, if there's one thing I know about urban legends and orphanages is that it's a very emotionally charged thing. You know, there will be energy and attachments left to that place, whether it's for the good or the bad. On top of that, it was a prisoner of war camp. I can't think of a more horrific, well, I can think of a few, but definitely not the place that you want to be. And so I'm not gonna sit here and say that a single sword in a castle is going to take all these different entities away from the location just because it's gone.
No, I think just too much energy is put into the environment, is put into the stone. And that is one theory in the paranormal field is it's the stone tape theory that basically emotions, energy, that we expend it, and that can be in a dramatic, sudden moment, you know, someone being killed, and it can be more drawn out and seeming more mundane, like someone being extremely depressed, like being a prisoner. And that energy is transferred to the environment around us, that basically it's captured into the stone, and that those places kind of relive those moments.
Like a conduit for it.
A conduit, almost like something replaying on a CD or a cassette tape or something. And I don't know, maybe that's true. I can, you know, there are so many places you go to and you just feel, you walk in, and have you ever walked in a place you go, boy, it feels so heavy here that you can't hardly breathe, and there's no real reason for it.
So what's one place that you had that sensation walking into? And it can't be one that we've talked about or have already named,
Ooh,
because that's
Boy.
cheating.
boy, howdy. Now, are you saying here in Springfield?
Not even necessarily. It's better if it's in Springfield, because the one I'm going to say is definitely not in Springfield, but
Well, I'm going to throw one out that, is in Springfield that maybe people don't think about a whole lot, you know, associate with a haunting. And that would be on the MSU campus in Freddie Hall, Fredenberger dorm. Uh, it has been reputed to be haunted for a very long time. It was built in the late 50s, and by the time I was a student there, uh, you would hear stories of people who lived there and that they would see a ghost or hear footsteps and that kind of thing. And I do know there were a couple times walking into the building, I lived in a different dorm, but I walk in to visit someone and you just felt like you got hit in the face and the chest, with,
oh yeah.
with heaviness that you really couldn't explain by a college dorm. And no one had died there that
Just
I'm
no,
aware of,
yeah.
or anything like that. Nothing to really explain it. Um, that would be one.
What about you? But what about y'all? You got a place, you get that, you walk in the door and it's like, oh, you know, okay.
Okay.
All right,
And,
yeah.
and for those listening, um, audience member is mentioning a building at the University of Nebraska.
With rumored, suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Anybody else want to say in China? It's okay if you don't want to. Right.
And where was that? At the UP?
Who? I was gonna say the Tower of London.
Well,
You-
okay,
You
okay,
want to talk about a place that's heavy
okay, well, that's fair.
that
I mean.
it was cool to go see, but I don't want to go back. But I think
And did you see Anne Boleyn?
no, but I saw some like 600-year-old graffiti. There's a lot of it.
I-
Oh yeah, they're huge. Like I mean, they're huge.
Well, no, there's a Raven Master at the Tower of
Mhm.
London, that they are kept there.
It's intimidating.
Yeah,
Hanging out.
yeah, it's all purposeful, and they've been there for hundreds of years. They've had a Raven Master for hundreds of years.
I want that job title. Sounds really cool. Right? I want to put that on a resume. Now, what you said kind of reminds me of another location here, though. Um, the Landers Theater.
Yeah,
Familiar with it? Okay. Okay.
not very far from here.
Nope, not at all. It is reportedly haunted unfortunately, by a vaudeville stagehand
Mm-hmm.
who hung himself from the rafters, stage left or right, I'm not sure. But he's reportedly seen there. And I don't know. There's something about walking into a theater and it makes my skin crawl thinking, imagine pulling the curtain back on. Like, next time you go in there, think about that.
Yeah, yeah, and I've been in there, and there, sometimes I've been in there and it's just fine, but there have been once or twice that over the years that I've been there and it just very heavy feeling. I never saw anything, or heard anything, but um I can see it as a possibility. And there are, there are some reports that there's activity here, but, and at the Galoy,
Hmm.
around, not far around the corner, so to speak.
I mean, unfortunately, and trust me, this would make our lives a whole lot easier. Just because a place is haunted doesn't mean you're going to get any sort of activity when you're there. Um,
Not necessarily.
I think, I don't know, even with our favorite locations that we have down in Joplin, getting a good piece of evidence is like a 1 in 10 shot.
Other than Kendrick House.
Kendrick House is a
I don't think we've ever been there that we didn't at least get a piece of audio, you know.
I've been going there for almost 20 years and I still get scared to death.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And that's something I think is worth mentioning, is that people often, they walk in a place that's reputed to be haunted. They expect a command performance. Oh, something's has to happen right now, and if it doesn't, oh, it's not haunted or whatever. And it doesn't work that way. And even places with a lot of activity, it's not the same night to night or day to day. And you really don't get a real picture of what's going on in a place unless you're there over time repeatedly. And
just move in.
and generally that doesn't you don't have that luxury to investigate. Now, the moving in now, and that's the flip side, is sometimes people are in a residence that has a lot of activity, and it can be very frightening to some people or disconcerting, and some people,
They thrive in it.
they thrive in it, or some people are like, whatever. Um, well, I mean, my house, lived there more than 20 years, and there's
There's a lot of stuff going on there.
there's a lot of stuff going on there, but it's not scary.
No, I wouldn't say at all.
And, um, it really hasn't affected how anyone is acted or lived, but,
There's some locations that people's lives break down
mhm.
because of the activity.
And now it might be that a different family in that house might view it differently, but it's not been something that has been disruptive um, at all. And
Y'all ever lived in a haunted house? No? Do you want to? That's the question. See, there you go.
a lot of times it does come down to
Like
things like
family
that.
members. And you'll have situations where people are scared to death, and it's Meemaw, I just want to make sure you're okay, So
Mhm.
well, I mean, what's his wife gonna do? Kill him?
Right.
Right.
And for those that are watching video, if you didn't hear that, audience members talking about um, a cuckoo clock that keeps flying off the wall at their house, and thinking that it's grandpa because he didn't like that clock, right? Yeah. But it's not scary there. And I think it's important to note that there is a lot of different reactions to activity. Um, let's see, some other places in the Springfield area that are pretty renowned for hauntings.
Yeah, sorry, I'm really good at getting on a tangent.
Well, and that's good. Good information comes out that way. But Phelps Grove Park, you go through Phelps Grove Park, and a lot of times I can see people going, what's spooky here? But if you go, there's a little creek through there and a bridge. And that is the area where people tend to encounter what is known as the ghost bride. And the story goes, and I've not been able to confirm the identities, but I've heard it so many times, you kind of think maybe there's something to it. And over time, because this supposedly happened back in the 1930s, is how I always hear it, is that a newlywed couple were driving through, and I've heard that it's either supposed to be icy or very wet and a very strong rainstorm going on. And they end up crashing and car going into the creek. And they both are killed. And that the woman is seen on the bridge or near the bridge and wearing old-fashioned dress. And so she tends to be nicknamed the Ghost Bride. I've never encountered that. Now, there is an area in the park that is a sort of a grove of trees, almost like a fairy grove, that is one place I've been in Springfield too, that is very heavy. I've been there several times when the energy there is, you just feel like it's really heavy and you can't explain why. I don't know. That I don't have even a theory on.
Well, those are called wraiths, according to particular mythologies.
Yes, well, that's true.
Yeah.
I am not saying that there are wraiths in the middle of Folksgrove Park.
No. You can't say that there isn't.
Well, that's true. I can't rule them out, but I'm not putting that out there affirmatively, at least at this point.
Also, to clarify, not the wraith in the sense that you would think of like a specter. In Irish folklore, a wraith would be a grove of trees that the line of thinking is, or the cautionary tale, if you will, is that you never run between two wraiths. So two little clusters of trees, because according to lore, that's essentially the highways for like the fae and other sorts of spirits. And so if you interrupt that, you're inviting them into
your world,
do the things that you don't want them to do.
Right.
So,
and in fact, in Ireland, there is a old manor house, and I can't think of the name of it right now, that is basically there. It's between two wraiths and built there and in like the 1700s, and the owner was warned not to disturb the fae, the wraiths. And he built anyway, and all kinds of misfortune happened, and it burned to the ground, and it got rebuilt, and it burned again. And finally, they just kind of left it. It's in ruins, but
yeah, it's abandoned now.
It's abandoned, but the lore is it's because it was built between two wraiths. And so,
again, I'm great for tangents.
yeah, but that's part of what we do is we incorporate folklore from other places and all kinds of things. Now then, okay, I mean, there's a couple other places that are kind of sort of random. One that I always find is sort of a random story that I've heard a number of times here in town is the Bass Country Inn up by Glenstone and 44. It's supposed to be haunted, supposedly by a man named, young boy named, I should say young man, Carl, who worked there in the restaurant as a busboy. And I've never really heard the real story of how Carl supposedly passed or anything, but that he is there and seen. Harmless, but again, just one of those places you not exactly expecting. I've heard some stories about the National Cemetery.
I don't think so.
I don't myself. I think that's coming from people seeing, oh, it's a cemetery, it must be haunted, and it's kind of old because you have Civil War graves, etc.
Personally, I think you have to have a very unique situation for a cemetery or a graveyard to actually be haunted.
Mm-hmm.
Because most ghost stories that you hear, um, they are tied to either people, objects, or locations. And these are things that were typically important to this person when they were alive. Um, I wouldn't want to hang out around my body after it's gone
Or a tombstone.
or a tombstone. I mean, that doesn't seem like a fun time. And we've done investigations in plenty of cemeteries, and
There's only one that I know of that has activity that I'm willing to say, and that's Peace Church Cemetery. And it's not because it's a cemetery, it's because of other things that happen there.
yeah, yeah, because there's very heavy things that happen there.
And that's down by Joplin. But most are pretty peaceful, I find.
They're supposed to be.
Mhm. And actually, for anyone that's curious, cemeteries in America really, the idea of having a forever grave was invented in America. It did not exist in Europe because overpopulation and being around centuries and centuries, you occupied a grave for a certain number of years, and then your bones were removed to the ossuary under the church, and then someone else got the grave. But in North America, people say, "Oh, we've got so much land, we can
We can do this.
we can do this and have graves forever." So that concept is really kind of a new concept, and it's just sort of an odd, when you think about it, an odd concept that we have embraced, and now we assume that's just natural. Okay, albino farm.
The albino farm. We've ignored it long enough.
Okay, you can't ignore the albino farm, no matter how much we try. Um, and it's funny, just generally in the Dark Ozarks, urban legends, there are two big ones, and it's A to Z. It's the albino farm in Springfield, and it's Zombie Road in St. Louis. um, and the albino farm urban legend, it's almost a legend that's trying to find itself, literally, because I mean, for years, I mean, even when when I was in college, and people will contact us now, where is it? Where is it? Well, it's not hard to find, but it's not what you think. Um, Spring Lawn Farms subdivision, that's where it is. But originally it was a farm. And in 1923, Michael Sheedy and his family purchased that farm. And then they added some land, and eventually they had about 1,200 acres, and then just, kind of north of town. And it's one of those things of how this came about is really odd. And it really comes down to pop culture. It really comes down to post-World War II teenage culture, car culture in part too. The Sheedys were successful farmers. They kind of stayed to themselves. They had a large family of 6 or 7 children, and they ended up setting up a family trust, so that when one family member passed away, their share in the land and the property was basically divided among the remaining family members. And then ultimately it came down to the last daughter passed away in around 1980. But way before that, tales of the albino farm had started, to the point that the Sheedys had to hire security to run people off, particularly around Halloween. So what is the legend of the albino farm? supposedly there is an albino with, and usually the story goes that he's out there with a hatchet and he kills people. Sometimes it almost gets to a Crystal Lake kind of version to it, that supposedly he's
Going
killing a
up
bunch of kids and
Lover's
maybe,
Lane.
yeah, or, summer camp almost, preying on a summer camp kind of thing. But those were very popular urban legend tropes after
Right.
World War II. And part of it comes from, kids suddenly having freedom in cars that they really had never had before. And then B, horror movies. And
B stands for best.
yeah, better try again, maybe. But with the Sheedy farm, it got mixed up with another legend, because just down the road, about half a mile from the farm, was a bridge that had been known as the Hatchet Man Bridge. And that legend was that there was a man out there with a hatchet, and he's an albino. Why an albino? I think just because albino, it's a more scary image for kids. That he would attack kids out there parking. And this grew up in the 40s, and at some point got conflated with the Sheedy farm, and supposedly the albino was there. And where I think where that came from was actually the Texarkana murders in 1946. Texarkana, Texas and Arkansas, had a series of murders where a man did attack couples at lovers' lanes with a hatchet. And it was national news, and, of course, people were scared about it. And I think that's really where the urban legend came. And unfortunately for the Sheedies, their farm got wound up in it. And after the last daughter died, the land was sold off, their personal property was sold off, and, basically subdivision was put in. And even now, we get questions through Dark Ozarks. Where is it? Where is it? Where can I find the albino farm? So that legend is it keeps being passed down from, kids to the next, group of kids a few years younger, and it keeps going.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's like I said at the beginning of this, you want that thrill. You want goosebumps.
You want that albino chasing you with a hatchet.
I cannot say that I do want that, but it's the thought that's alluring for a lot of people. Well, it's the same reason. Going out to the spook light.
Yeah, down at Joplin.
If you're familiar with that, you want to go experience something that's not, it's not ordinary. Paranormal. Good, I did there. But it's in our nature, thrill seeking, and we love things that go bump in the night. So much so that, over almost 80 years later, we're still having essentially the same story told of, the Texarkana murders.
Yeah. Although people just don't realize that's where it's coming from.
And again, unfortunately, these poor folks got plopped right in the crosshairs of, pop culture sensationalism and, urban legends, and they're just trying to run a farm. So
So unfortunately, there really isn't an albino at the albino farm, and it's not quite what people are hoping it is as far as the legend.
that's what we have spook houses for.
Yeah.
You can get chased by a man with a hatchet.
or chainsaw.
as as many times as you want to pay for
Exactly.
it.
And then that way, the farmer's not having to pay for security.
Exactly, it's a win-win for everybody. Um, so was there anything that you guys might have questions about that we talked about? Anything that we didn't talk about that, you want to throw out there? Say, I have nice shoes or something. I don't know. Nothing? No?
They're quiet.
Very quiet. That's
They-
okay. I'm just thankful that y'all came.
Same here.
Doing these on a Friday night is like, that's a gamble. And this happened to be a Friday night where weather is starting to get a little bit better. And it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should move days though in the future.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, if you guys don't have any,
Oh, hers. Yes. Hers department store building. It has, of course, it's sat empty for years now. I can't remember exactly when it closed, in late eighties, didn't it? That's. Mm-hmm. And, if there's been tales, as long as I know, of employees and even sometimes customers encountering, um, someone they thought was there and then realize, oh, that person's not there, or they walk through a wall, that kind of thing. And I've had people say, I can't, why in the world is hers department store haunted? And honestly, I think that if there is something going on there, it probably does go back to the Civil War, because where that building sits during the Civil War was the courthouse, and it was used throughout the war as a hospital, military hospital. And so you had lots of men come through there that were injured and passed away,
Trauma.
etc. Trauma.
very awful stuff.
Yes. And so that's my guess. And then, of course, I mean, on the steps of that building, you had the first gunfight of the Old West, and the only call-out walk down gunfight of the Old West. It happened right here on the square in Springfield in 1865 with Wild Bill Hickok and Dave Tutt. And and that's a whole story about an argument over whether Hickok owed Tutt money from a poker game, and Tutt taking his watch as collateral, and it was his dad's watch, and so it was a matter of honor. And they were also arguing over a girl.
Never fails.
Never fails. And they were actually best friends. Well, it ended up in the honor culture of the day, particularly from Southern region, even though Hickok wasn't from the South, he was from Illinois. Basically, you ended up with a situation where if he didn't if he didn't do something with Tut and call him out, he'd be considered a coward. And if Tut didn't show up, he would be considered a coward. So two best friends end up walking out on the square, and both pulling a gun, and they both were very dangerous men with a gun. It's just.
They're poor shots.
No, Tut just barely missed him from what some accounts are, and Hickok hit him.
Mm.
And then, as the story goes, Dave Tutt ran to the steps of the courthouse, fell over as he was saying, "I'm dead, boys." So he died on the steps of that building that was there before hers. So you have all kinds of things. Well, and And it was right there on the sidewalk at that same place that Judge Yancey killed John Robertson in 1837. Yeah, judge killed the guy, and they kind of had a rivalry, and he thought Robertson was pulling a gun on him, and he shot him, and he wasn't. And that happened right in front of that building too, or the building that was there at that time. So you've had a lot of things happen right there on that corner, so not too surprising that someone might be hanging around.
And it seems like, especially in this area, it's the genesis of all ghost stories. It's either the Civil War, or it's Tales of the Wild West.
Tales of the Wild West, or the Tragic Bride.
That's one repeated very often.
Yeah, but those are very large themes in this area, and themes that often are not associated with this area too much. People don't think about, but there was a lot of Civil War action in the area, and in the first year of the war, more battles and skirmishes happened in Missouri than any other place than Virginia. And the Old West really did start here. I mean, some historians will tell you it started at the Alamo, but even the Alamo, traces of the Alamo go back to Missouri. So, but pretty much if it happened in the Old West, it happened here first. And so, you know, there's no surprise that we have a lot of lingering things from that moment, from those moments.
Right. Do you have any other questions?
Okay.
If that's the case, then you can catch the Dark Ozarks podcast on Branson Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or about any other podcast platform. Thank you, everybody, and remember, there are no easy answers in the Dark Ozarks.